President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga were the chief guests during the just concluded luncheon organized to mark this year's 68th U.S. National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. The two were invited to narrate to the world about how they beat all the odds and crossed all the hard lines to find a political truth through the famous Building Bridges initiative. In his speech, the president recounted the destabilizing impact the post-election conflicts and violence have had on the country's growth over the last 30 years, saying that the Building Bridges initiative, BBI, is aimed at finding a homegrown solution to the divisive nature of Kenyan politics. He also went ahead and made note that divisive politics and resultant ethnic tensions negatively affect the country's development path, because when there are elections, everything comes to a standstill. Businesses stop to 1 year before elections and restarts again 1 year after the elections, hence making everyone plan their businesses around that election cycle, thus compromising senior American officials. President Kenyatta, who retraced Kenya's history of election-related ethnic conflicts since the adoption of a multi-party democracy in the early 90s, said that his coming together with his main political challenger, Mr. Odinga, was motivated by the realization that the disruption of the economy by the electoral tensions every so often was not sustainable. So he went ahead and narrated about the tense and long process that led to the handshake with Mr. Odinga, recalling the excruciating silence that filled the room for almost 6 hours before they began to talk. He expressed the satisfaction that millions of Kenyans have joined and are participating in the BBI process, adding that his greatest desire is to live a peaceful and united country. Now, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga also had his stake in this, and in his speech, Mr. Odinga said that he shares the President's determination and commitment to achieve national cohesion through the Building Bridges initiative process by building trust and unity among Kenyans. The opposition leader also added that the BBI is a historic journey to a united and stable Kenya, as it will help address several challenges facing the country, including youth unemployment, corruption, and negative ethnicity.
So let me begin by saying what a deep honor and privilege it is to join all of you this afternoon as we break bread together and as we share experiences on reconciliation. And reconciliation is easier said than done. Reconciliation in situations where deep divisions have existed for many years, and in some cases are even generational differences passed from one generation to the next. It's extremely difficult, like I said, easier said than done. As a country, and Senator Coons has put his point across and stated that we moved from a single-party system to a multi-party system in 1992. And at that time, it was difficult to imagine, and everybody, thought that just by changing one clause in our Constitution, Section 2A, and allowing a process of multi-party democracy in itself was just going to be a panacea. Unfortunately, that didn't end up being the case. Because although we entered and opened up the political space. That political space wasn't filled by political parties that were either ideologically based or based on any given principles, but rather all it did is to institutionalize the ethnic and clan divides that had been used previously to keep our people apart. So from 1992, which was the first multi-party election, to 1997, these ethnic divides just deepened. No party was ever able to secure a significant majority, and each election always turned out to be a process of ethnic conflict. The only election during that period that ended up with some kind of majority was an election where my good friend Raila here teamed up with Mwai Kibaki against me and President Moi in 2002, and they gave me a good hiding. That was about the only election that we can say was won in Kenya with a majority. Unfortunately, given the situation, once again, in 2007, following the collapse of the then NAC, and again the rise of ethnic-based groupings, Kenya witnessed her worst cycle of election violence in 2007. That, ultimately with the intervention of friends and the region, especially, an agreement was signed and a coalition government formed between President Mwai Kibaki, Prime Minister Raila Odinga, with a clear aim that once again we needed as a country to relook at ourselves. And through that, we gave ourselves a new constitution in 2010 that entrenched certain aspects. One, we needed to look at the issue of devolution and the feeling of marginalization. And we dealt with that through creating a devolved system of government so that decisions didn't necessarily all have to be made up in Nairobi, and we allowed our regions to have a bit more say and access to more resources to be able to decide for themselves what their priorities were. We focused also on a number of other areas. What kind of system do we want to run? Do we want a federal system? And we ended up saying no, we wanted Kenya to be a unitary state but with devolved entities. Once again, we thought we had found a solution to our problems. We proceeded to the election of 2013, which, though not violent, still left Kenya bitterly divided along the same lines, almost 50-50. The 2017 were again almost 50-50, which always gave room for people to say, well, I was cheated out of me, we were robbed of the election, this happens, this happens. And all of this unfortunately, once again, built tensions between ethnic communities. Once again, almost brought Kenya to the brink of chaos. It was at that stage I realized that it wasn't possible for us to continue in this manner. Because at the end of the day, leadership is given by the Almighty, not for those who sit the throne of power, but it's for those who we are supposed to be serving. And we had to ask ourselves, are we serving?
I want us to begin by a quote from the Bible. Jesus, from the Mount, the Sermon on the Mount, that blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see the kingdom of the Lord. Another Americans say that any jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a good carpenter to build one. So the responsibility actually rested between me and my brother here to build a barn after another contested elections. But as he has already mentioned, it was not the first one. We have had, it's known in Kenya that there were only 2 elections, there were no disputes. The first one that brought independence in 1963, the second one, which is mentioned, in 2002, when they teamed up with Mr. Kibaki to send him home with Moi. Well, now we were here. Disputed elections, the Supreme Court has nullified. We have ourselves boycotted a runoff. He has ran on his own. He's been sworn in, and I've also been sworn in. So now he did not have to talk to me. As mentioned. He could have said, I've already been legally sworn in as a president. I would proceed on running the government. And I would also say that I don't need to have any negotiations. We'll bring down this government through positive action. Demonstrations, boycotts, strikes, and so on. So there will be no real need for us to talk. But he has mentioned that the councils of goodwill prevailed and said that we should talk together. It was not easy, as he has mentioned. But we realize that the country is bigger than all of us. But what he did not tell you is that we have history together. When we met, we took journey down the memory lane, as is mentioned, where we started as a country. Kenya had been colonized by the British for over 60 years, and they never intended to leave the country. It was a result of a very bitter struggle for independence that eventually independence came to the people of Kenya. His own father was imprisoned by the British for 9 good years, 7 years of those hard labor. My father led the struggle to get his father out of prison. And at independence, his father became the president, and my father became the vice president of Kenya. And the country was very united. So we asked ourselves the question, when and why did the grain begin to beat us as a nation? Because if you can find that, then we are in the process of trying to solve the problem. And we went and found where the rain began to beat us. And it has been the source of division in our country. It created what we call ethnicity or tribalism in the country, which has resulted in a lot of suffering for our people. Then the opportunities took charge and advantage and split the country along ethnic lines. So he said, to solve the Kenyan problem, must go where we started. After that, we have also worked together. I was the Minister for Energy and became a Member of Parliament. He was leader of the opposition when I was Minister for Roads and Public Works. We teamed up together to defeat a constitution that Kenya did not want. In fact, he's one of the founding members of my party, the Orange Democratic Movement. Then after the last disputed elections of 2007, after too much suffering and bloodshed, we formed a coalition government, a grand coalition government. I became the Prime Minister, and he was my Deputy Prime Minister. So we are colleagues. We have worked together for a long time, we knew each other. So we said, we want to bring the people of Kenya together. We must address the constitutive factors which have kept our people apart. And as is mentioned, first, I was hesitant to attend the meeting. After a lot of discussions with the emissaries, agreed that he should meet. He came to that venue driving himself with only one person. I also went to that venue driving myself with only one person. Just discovered the details of how we interacted. It was exactly 13 hours, the first meeting. We adjourned. We met again 2 days later for another 6 hours. We now agreed that we now, our meeting of minds, we can now call other people, experts, to come and put it together. And then he brought one person and I brought the other person. One of the persons we brought is he put it to paper. They went and made the drafts, brought them to me, I made some alterations, he altered also, until we eventually said, this now reflects our thinking. We discovered, one, that there are no national ethos in our country. We talked about shared prosperity or disparity in terms of regional development. Ethnicity as a factor that divides our people. We talked about issues of corruption as a cancer in our society that takes away resources which are meant for development. Then we talked about insecurity, divisive elections. As you already mentioned, how elections divide our people along ethnic lines, and every 5 years, you only work for 3 years, 2 years, people are watching what's going to happen, or both sides of the elections. Then we talked about unemployment in our country, the youth unemployment. So there are all in all 9 factors that we identified. And we put as a team to go and now put it together in writing. And indeed they went and put it in writing, and then eventually we launched it. And we called it the Building Bridges Initiative.